Now, India is basking in the glory of achieving a diplomatic coup by making the East and the West agree to the New Delhi Declaration at the G20 summit. And now, New Delhi is set to spice up things between the East and the West as a historical relationship is back on the map. Our next report getting you more.
China's economy is in choppy waters, and with it, its most ambitious plan, the Belt Road Initiative, is feeling the heat. The Italians are the latest to steer clear of Xi Jinping's pet project. Enter New Delhi. It has constructed a broad alliance of states to create a modern-day spice route linking Europe, West Asia and India, boosting trade ties with potentially wide-ranging geopolitical implications.
With the participation of Saudi Arabia.
Many are pegging this to an ode to the ancient spice route, dating back thousands of years to around 3000 BC. Spice route acted as a bridge for cultural and religious exchanges between different regions of the world. The previous route passed through historical cities of Asia, Northeast Africa and Europe. Cinnamon, cardamom, ginger and turmeric were important items during the earliest evolution of trade, thus giving it the name of the spice route. It was a major export facilitator for India, China, Indonesia and several West Asian nations. The spice routes were established 2000 years before the Silk Route was established. And now, the ambitious multinational corridor is being touted as the 21st century spice route. The project includes India, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, the European Union, EU member countries France, Italy, Germany and the United States. The corridor will include a rail link, an electricity cable, a hydrogen pipeline as well as high-speed data cable. The new trade corridor is divided into two parts. First is called the Eastern Corridor. It will connect the Indian port of Mundra on the west coast of India with Fujairah port in the UAE. The containers will then be transported by rail via Saudi Arabia and Jordan to the Israeli port of Haifa. After this, the Western Corridor will take Indian goods to Marseille in France and ports in Italy and Greece. Beijing has officially welcomed the new economic corridor, but it doesn't want it to become a geopolitical tool. Meanwhile, Ankara is feeling left out. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says that there could not be a corridor without Turkey. The modern version of the ancient spice route will not only speed up trade links between India and Europe by up to 40%, but will also have wider geopolitical ramifications too. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Now for more on this, we have a special guest joining us on this broadcast, William Dalrymple. He's a historian and visiting fellow at All Souls College, Oxford. He's joining us live from London. Thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast, sir.
Not at all, Ananya. A pleasure.
Now, this India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor is being hailed as strategic in terms of diplomacy as well as trade. Do you see this as a counter to China's Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, I'm not a geopolitical commentator. I'm a historian, Ananya. But what I can tell you is that there's been a very recent domination of all discussion of East-West trade by the idea of the Silk Road. And contrary to what most people think, the Silk Road is not actually an ancient idea. It was only dreamt up in the 19th century by a German geographer who called it the Seidenstrasse. And it only really became popular in English in the kind of 1990s and 1980s. It's a very recent idea, and then got sort of militarized and weaponized by the Chinese government, who created the Belt and Road Initiative around this ancient idea. In reality, in the classical period, at the time of ancient Rome, the main east-west trade route was nothing to do with China. China and Rome barely knew of each other's existence. They were legendary entities. Neither were very clearly aware of the other. But at that time, there was a regular motorway across the Red Sea connecting India and the Roman Empire via the ports of Egypt. And 250 ships each year passed just out of one port alone, backwards and forwards. And these were not tiny boats. These were major container cargo vessels of their day, and hugely valuable. The latest estimates estimate that around 1/3 of the entire Roman budget was extracted by the customs posts for goods coming not just from India, but from the Arab world and Ethiopia, coming up the Red Sea. And when they taxed them at Berenike, which was the Roman port on the Red Sea, they produced such colossal quantities of money for the Roman exchequer that it paid for 1/3 of the entire military budget of the empire.
Right. Sir, bringing your expertise here, you have studied the first century Indo-Roman trade at length, where, as pointed by you, India played a huge role. I want to ask you, do you think the old and now the new spice route overlap in their expansiveness and trade potential?
Well, it's not just the spice route. Your very nice and colourful introduction talked about it as something that was mainly spices. In reality, there was a whole range of products coming from India to Rome, expensive luxury products. Spices was certainly one, and a very important one. But there was also ivory, and the documents we have seem to make out that that was the most valuable, along with gemstones. And cotton. Cotton was another major Indian export at this time. So all these different goods were coming from India to Rome. And you have the Roman writer Pliny complaining that there is this sort of drain of gold from the Roman Empire into Indian pockets, because the Indians weren't really interested in Western goods. There were some things they liked. They liked Roman wine. They liked Roman olive oil. And they also liked an early fish sauce called garum. It was a sort of spicy fermented fish sauce, rather like the sort you get in Southeast Asia. All these have been found by archaeologists at the major Indian ports of the period, which are in Gujarat, at Barigaza, the ancient port of Gujarat, at Muziris, which is in modern Kerala, near Cochin, and at Arikamedu, which is near Pondicherry in Tamil Nadu. These three international ports sent huge amounts of shipping backwards and forwards, vast container vessels. And this is not sort of the stuff of legend or guesswork. We have many of the figures. There's an amazing papyrus, which is now in Vienna, called the Muziris papyrus, that lays out in great detail it's a chance survival of a single contract between an Alexandrian shipper sitting in Egypt and a merchant exporter in Kerala, in Muziris. And the value of this one container, of which, a container ship could contain, like today, very many. This one container, if successfully delivered to Egypt, would have been the same sort of money that would allow you to build a major estate over a great swathe of Egypt, or a premier estate in the middle of Roman Italy, in Tuscany. And so one successful consignment of ivory alone would have been enough to have turned you into, the Roman equivalent of an Ambani or an Adani.
Right. Now, given the geopolitical compulsions which we assume would have existed even back then, can this current route be a natural route for trade when compared to the first century one?
So I think the geopolitical thing has been there all along. The physical fact is that the Tibetan plateau heats up in summer and it cools again in winter. And this produces monsoon winds that blow in one direction for 6 months and then back again the other 6 months. And if you catch the monsoon at any period in history, you can just sail all the way to Egypt in as little as 5 or 6 weeks. And then when the wind turns, you can sail back again with equal ease. So this is not just something from the first century, although the first century was extremely important. We know, for example, that there were peppercorns discovered up the nose of Ramesses II, the pharaoh who built many of the pyramids. He has Indian peppercorns as part of his preservative in his nose. So at that period, the Indus Valley or the Maloha civilization was sending boats, even then, up this route to Egypt. So it's a very ancient route. And then it carried on through the Middle Ages when you've got the Mamluks taking over Egypt. You have them trading with the various sultanates in medieval India. So this isn't just one period of history. Throughout history, this has been a major trade route. And to some extent, we've forgotten about it. And so the reopening of it makes perfect geographical and geopolitical sense. This has always been a major source of wealth for India and a very obvious thing to tap again today.
Right. You make a very fine point there. It's important not just for geography, but also geopolitics. Thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast and getting us all those insights.